Welcome to our presentation about secondary succession in Point Pleasant Park after the significant hurricane disturbance of Hurricane Juan in 2003. Point Pleasant Park is a loved and well-used 75-hectare urban forest located on the southern Halifax Peninsula. Before being used as a site to guard entrance to the Halifax Harbor by the British, the land played a significant role for the local Mi'kmaq people as a spiritual place. Following the first full moon of spring, or the frog croaking month, the Mi'kmaq people would gather for 7 days in this sacred place, which still holds much significance for the Mi'kmaq people to this day. On September 29, 2003, Hurricane Juan hit Nova Scotia, causing devastating damage throughout the Halifax region, including Point Pleasant Park. With sustained winds of 151 kilometers per hour, Hurricane Juan is recorded as the most destructive storm since 1893. Despite the extensive root system of the even-aged, old-growth forest, the shallow soil paired with the lack of buffer from the heavy winds due to the even age of the forest caused the storm to topple over more than 80,000 trees in Point Pleasant Park, extensively changing the ecological forest community of the park. This significant disturbance marks the beginning of secondary succession in Point Pleasant Park. There are a few key terms to define before discussing the data collected. Secondary succession is the slow change in a community following a disturbance that does not remove or change the soil in a given area. Climax community refers to the end point of succession. This is a community in equilibrium with its environment with little to no ecological changes. Density of species is used to describe the number of target species in a given area, in our case 400 meters to the -2. Richness refers to the number of species and the relative abundance, and evenness refers to the distribution of species within a given boundary. The objectives of this study are to gather information about the overall change in the forest community over time and understand how the forest will change as secondary succession continues towards its climax community by observing multiple community metrics. We hypothesize that over time, following the disturbance, the new dominant species will continue to grow and dominate the community. Along with this, both the forest density and species richness will also increase as more species regenerate and the forest moves towards a climax community. As the climax is reached, growth and richness will begin to taper out as the community begins to stabilize.
To conduct this research, data was collected by Biology 2060 students annually in October from 2004 to 2023. Due to unforeseen circumstances, data was not able to be collected in the years 2005, 2007, 2016, and 2020. A total of 6 20-meter by 20-meter sites, as seen in the image on this slide, were chosen to collect data from because these particular sites were believed to represent the areas of the park that were impacted the most by Hurricane Juan. With the help of a field guide, students were able to collect information on the density of red maples, the density of red spruces, the total density of trees, as well as the species richness at each site.
When assessing the overall change of the forest community over time, we can look at Figure 1, which displays a regression analysis used to observe the effect of time in years over the total density of species in Point Pleasant Park. The total species density has increased in the years following the Hurricane Juan disturbance, demonstrated by the total density averaged over the 4 sites measured in 2023 being approximately 43 times larger than the total average density in 2004. There's a positive relationship between time and species density, indicating that as time goes on, the species density increases. The storm knocked down much of the large, even-aged forest that would have previously been shading much of the forest, allowing much more light and other resources to be readily available for other species to begin secondary succession, leading to a decrease in competition for resources. Species that are less shade tolerant, for example, would be able to establish some space in the forest and use the readily available sunlight and other resources that they may need to regenerate. The destruction of the forest by the storm could have had other influences on the nutrient density of the soil, possibly by decomposing debris from the storm, for example, and temperature and humidity levels. We can also infer that around 2015 there was some human interference, such as the planting of species, and the numbers of species in certain sites dramatically increases. Due to an availability of resources and inferred human intervention, the total density of species in Point Pleasant Park was able to steadily increase as secondary succession was underway. As the environment reaches its community climax, the total species density will stabilize as a steady state of dominant and established species will use up resources that will no longer be available for new or unestablished species to utilize. This will cause the total species density to reach a stable, steady point at community climax. In order to compare specific species density and the changes of both the red maple and the red spruce individually over time, a linear regression analysis was used. To determine their dominance throughout secondary succession, we must first observe the changes of each species separately. Figure 2.1 shows an increasing growth rate of the density of red maple, the dominant species in 2023, indicated by a positive slope of 2.95 and displays a weak relationship between the species density and time. This demonstrates the species recovery and dominance over the succession period since the disturbance of Hurricane Juan in 2004. We can reject the null hypothesis and conclude that there is an increase in red maple density over time. The number of red spruce trees were counted at the sites in Point Pleasant Park to determine how the density has changed since the Hurricane Juan disturbance. This data is represented by Figure 2.2, which illustrates that the density of red spruce trees has increased by approximately 0.32 trees per site each year from 2024 to 2023.
Through comparison of the two species density values, we can see that there is an increase in both the red maple and red spruce from 2004 to 2023. Immediately in the aftermath of Hurricane Juan, the red spruce prevailed as the dominant species and no red maples were found at any of the 4 sites where data was collected. However, there has been a significantly higher growth rate of red maples following the hurricane, which has resulted in it becoming the dominant species to date in 2023. So why has the dominant species changed during this period of secondary succession? One possible reason to explain this outcome is that there was an external human influence on this ecosystem. Particularly, it is possible that some of the red maple trees were planted at one of the sites between 2008 and 2009 collection dates, as one site was found to have 42 trees in 2009 in comparison to the total of 0 red maple trees that were found at the sites in 2008. Another reason why the red maple is currently dominating is that it is a highly adaptable generalist species. It can successfully grow in different soil types, light conditions, and grows very quickly compared to a species like the red spruce, which is a late successional species. These traits are some of the reasons why the red maple was able to take over as the dominant species in Point Pleasant Park. As the forest approaches its climax community, the growth of the red maple and red spruce species will stabilize. Particularly, this will occur as Point Pleasant Park reaches the late successional stage as indicated by Figure 4. The stages of succession can take several decades to occur, so we might not know the correct answer to the question of which species will dominate for many years to come. However, based on current trends and knowledge of the growth characteristics of each species, it is likely that the red maple species will continue to dominate until a climax community is reached. The number of unique species at each site in Point Pleasant Park was counted to determine how the species richness has changed since Hurricane Juan. To answer this question, Dalhousie students enrolled in the ecology course visit Point Pleasant Park each October and counted the number of species present at each site. This data is represented by Figure 3. Overall, this figure illustrates that the species richness value of Point Pleasant Park has increased by approximately 0.6 new species each year from 2004 to 2023. So why did the species richness value increase from 2.5 to 10.5 on average from 2004 to 2023? In the early stages of succession, species may have moved to the sites of interest since they had much more room to accommodate new species after the hurricane. According to one study, species richness can even increase during the later stages of succession because the old growth forest species grow more quickly than the early successional species are lost. Additionally, just as with the density of the red maple, it is also possible that the species richness increased at the sites because members of the public planted new species in order to support the succession of the forest. So, as the forest approaches its climax community, we believe that the species richness will continue to increase as the older growth thrives and as the new growth moves in. Based on the research that we have conducted on succession dynamics and evaluating the current data collected from the 6 sites, we believe that the Acadian forest in Point Pleasant Park is currently in the mid-succession stage. We believe this because the densities of the red spruce and red maple, as well as the overall species density of each site, continues to increase each year. Ultimately, there are 2 reasons why the succession of Point Pleasant Park may differ from what we would expect to occur in nature. First of all, the development of human infrastructure can destroy existing habitats, a phenomenon known as habitat fragmentation. This can influence succession as there are fewer nearby habitats for species to migrate from, making it difficult for new species to emerge after natural disasters. Secondly, since the park is in a popular urban area, members of the public or scientific community can impact the process of succession by adding flora. We believe that this occurred in 2009 when there was a spike in the density of red maple trees, as seen in Figure 2.1. This is an example of a positive human influence for the population of red maples as it supported them to become the dominant species in the park. In order to support the forest to return to its climax community, we can utilize the principle of the Mi'kmaq Nation known as two-eyed seeing. Two-eyed seeing refers to the skill of integrating the strengths of indigenous and Western philosophies into one's work. One example of an indigenous philosophy that we can integrate into the recovery of Point Pleasant Park is how we view the land. In indigenous culture, the land is viewed as something that we are privileged to have and take care of, not something that we own.
We would like to thank Christine Beauchamp for the creation of this project, Dr. Allison Schmidt for her preparing the data to be used and interpreted, including the statistical analyses, graphs, and data organization, as well as the students of Biology 2060 at Dalhousie University for the collection of data over the years. We would also like to thank the teaching assistants and all others involved in the rigorous and ongoing collection of data to help progress and deepen our understanding of the land and its recovery following a disturbance. We also thank the Mi'kmaq people for their sharing of land and acknowledge that we work and play on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. We are all treaty people. Thank you.
And here are our references. Thank you for listening.